Today's episode is supported by Cypress River Advisors, a US-based technology and media strategic advisory firm. They work with philanthropic partners to conduct research, inform policymakers, and communicate results that can lead to collective action towards creating a clean energy future for our children.
Hi guys, this is Nate. When we first started this podcast, producer Emily and I said we're going to make one episode. And then we said, okay, let's make 3. Well, now we're at episode 14. We are really proud of what we've been able to do, and we're also super grateful to you, the listener. So we wanted to do something a bit different. We're based in Taipei, and there are some really cool people doing innovative work here, and we wanted to bring them all together. On a sunny Saturday afternoon in August, 80 people crammed into the Red Room performance space for our first live event. Someone even made tacos for all of us. If this is your first episode, there are some inside jokes that might seem a bit weird. And if you've listened to our other episodes, then this one might be a bit longer than the others, which makes this episode extra special. Our 3 panelists were Godfrey Ngai, CFO of Xing Mobility, an electric vehicle battery company going after 2/3 of the world's vehicles; Melody Xu, co-founder of ViaSweat, an activewear brand trying to use more sustainable textiles made from recycled materials; and Hamoun Karami, founder of Lidbot, a startup that wants to transform the way we think about trash. So, without wasting any more time, why not jump right in? Hi, I'm Nature Nate. This is Waste Not, Why Not Live, and I'm a very tall man based in the Red Room, and we're going to be talking about electric vehicles, sustainable textiles, and smart trash cans. Most people, I assume everyone in this room, believes in climate change and the environment, and we can talk about that later if you don't. But the next step from knowing about the environment is, how do you do something about it? That could be charity, that could be going to beach cleanups, that could be donating to NGOs, something like that. That's sort of like level 1. And then many other people want to have green careers and have a green job. Maybe they want to be an environmental researcher or have a podcast about the environment. That one's taken, but there's other jobs that you can do, and I wanted to have a panel that shows you that it's not just, a Greenpeace activist or someone who's protesting in front of a school, but you can incorporate the environment into your jobs and into your life, and you can do it that way. Okay, so we're going to introduce our guests one by one. First, we're going to introduce Ham. Come on down. I met Ham. Ham works on smart trash cans. He'll provide, just take a seat up anywhere. Ham works on smart trash cans, and I've known him for about 2 years. You can actually read a very old interview that we did a couple of years ago, and he's trying to do things that change the way we approach trash. He's trying to make it smarter. Tell us in your own words, who are you? What's your business?
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Hamoun, that's my full name, but I go by Ham since I was like 5. And I started a startup last year called Lidbot, Lidbot. Basically, we thought it was a good idea to stick smart sensors into trash bins and collect some cool data, something that's kind of absent right now in the industry. And I'll share much more, obviously, about what we do, right? Or do I do that now?
Kind of tell us now, but we can go over it later too.
Okay, cool. This is it. Okay, so basically we've developed this sensor called Lidbot. It sticks to the top of waste and recycling bins. Immediately what it does is it lowers the cost of collection for cities and companies because it can measure how full the bin is in real time. So cities and big businesses don't have to go around checking every single bin. That's kind of how we get them to jump on board. Our vision for the next 3 to 5 years, 10 years is to have this ecosystem where all these sensors are collecting data about how much, who, where, when, how often. So the industry is lacking right now data that represents and can speak to accountability, transparency. When you find a bag of garbage, you often ask, who produced this? our company's end goal is to use our technology to start addressing those problems. So that's what we do at our company. That's what we've been doing for the past year. It's something that we're very excited about. How's that?
Thanks, Ham. That's good. That's good. We'll talk more later. Up next, where is Melody from ViaSweat? Here, take a seat. Melody has a functional fabric, e-commerce, athletic wear for women based in Taiwan. And the interesting thing is that she offers sustainable textiles made from recycled plastic bottles. I'm a big fan of that. And she's also looking at exploring other sustainable materials as well. So, Melody, I'll let you introduce yourself. Who are you? What is your business? And why are you doing it in Taiwan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Melody. I'm the co-founder of ViaSweat, which is a women's activewear brand based in Taiwan. The reason why I kind of wanted to start this brand was because Taiwan actually accounts for like 70% of the world's global output of functional fabrics. Yet Taiwan doesn't really have a brand, a fashion brand that could represent this. And so my vision for ViaSweat was to create a brand that could, let people know that Taiwan doesn't just do a lot of the production for these big and global brands, but that we also have a brand of our own. Besides that, Taiwan also has, one of the highest recycling rates in the world. And so we have access to a lot of really great sustainable textile options like recycled polyester or recycled nylon, which is made from fishing nets. And so we're exploring more and more ways of how to make this brand more sustainable and talking more about, circular fashion and closing the loop. But this journey hasn't always been, we didn't start off eco, we didn't start off sustainable, so it's been a learning process. So I can share a little bit about my journey as the show goes on.
Thank you. Yes, we will have much journey sharing. Okay, and last but absolutely not least is Godfrey. Come on up from Xing Mobility. Xing Mobility is converting traditional construction and non-consumer vehicles into electric vehicles, which I think is really fascinating. We're all talking about Tesla and Gogoro and having all of us being able to buy electric vehicles, but what about all those regular vehicles that are used on a daily basis and burn tons of fuel? How are we gonna make those electric? So Godfrey, who are you? What's your business? And why are you doing it in Taiwan?
Sure. Why am I in Taiwan? Because Taiwan is the best place in the world. So, so I am with a company called Xing Mobility. In Chinese, it's Xingjing Keji. So I'm not sure whether you guys have heard of us. We've been getting a lot of exposure because part of our R&D platform, we've built an electric supercar that is faster than the Tesla Roadster. So it does 0 to 100 in 1.8 seconds and is off-road. But we're not a car company, but instead we are a electric battery pack and powertrain technology solution company. We are very lucky, our co-founder, Azizi Tucker, who was with Tesla, he was employee number 60 with Tesla, decided to leave Tesla and founded this new company. What's very unique with us is the biggest challenge in electric vehicle and battery is actually heat management. And we've invented a technology called immersion cooling, which means we actually dip the battery pack in a liquid that's actually non-conductive. And what that results is we get the highest power density, highest energy density, and 3 times the battery life. Because if a battery overheat for just one time, it loses 50% of its life. So because with better battery management, we're able to do that. But what's also more unique is we have a modular design. To many of us don't know is passenger cars only take up 1/3 of the global vehicle market. 2/3 of the market are actually commercial vehicles and recreational vehicles, which are very difficult to address because they all comes in different shapes and forms, and they are what we call the low volume, high mix vehicles. And because we're modular, we're able to attack those kind of market at much more cost effective and much more fast pace in terms of prototyping. And I guess why Taiwan? Taiwan's industrialization was built on an OEM market. Taiwan is very, very good at prototyping. So what we believe, and we've actually proven that Taiwan is actually, we call the fastest place, which is the shortest distance from concept to reality, because in terms from a product perspective, we can do that a lot more cost effectively, and that's sort of us.
Cool, thanks Godfrey. The fastest place from concept to reality. I think that's also the same as this podcast. Anyway, Our first question, what are some of the challenges you're facing in your business today? What are some challenges you faced in the past, and how are you overcoming those? It's not easy to make a green business. I've tried to do that in the past. How are you overcoming these challenges? What are they? What should we all know?
Cool. Good question. Because we are doing something that really hasn't been done, a lot of the times we face issues with convincing potential customers to buy in. So that's why we've kind of placed our product solution offering as having incentives for them. So when I explained my business, the first thing I mentioned was, well, we help them lower their cost of collection. So if you're trying to build a sustainable business who's for profit, especially that's the key word, for profit, you have to make sure, I mean, the business terms are called unit economics or your ROI, return on investment. You have to make sure you properly define those numbers so that when you go to a potential customer and say, hey, listen, we want to stick sensors in your waste and recycling bins, you're prepared to answer why. As a company who's trying to do something that really hasn't been done much, that's kind of one of the biggest challenges that we have. And I want to touch on another. So because we are producing something, we are making something, we are manufacturing something. So in these processes, there is waste. So you have to be very careful, especially for us, when we say we're a company that's trying to be sustainable. We have to make sure we don't put too much of a large footprint ourselves to do so. So putting into practices like where we have a hardware device, which is with an exterior casing. How are we sourcing those materials? How are we designing them? How are we going to make sure that we implement a system where when they're out of battery or they need to be swapped, how are we prepared to recycle them? I mean, there's a quote, 14 trees every year are cut down for signs for people trying to save the trees. So you have to be careful. How far is that message going? And you have to make sure you think about every step along the way.
Okay. I don't care much about 14 trees, but thanks for sharing, Ham. I don't want to throw you under the bus.
Nate doesn't care about 14 trees, guys.
You thought this was going to just be friendly, but
14 trees.
Challenges, comments.
As an activewear brand, so we're very close to the consumer. I think part of our job is to kind of communicate the value of buying, more sustainable options. And a lot of times when you do more sustainable textiles or sustainable options, it's more costly. It's relatively new, and so a lot of this whole economies haven't really kicked in yet, and people are still investing in all these new sustainable technologies to create these sustainable textiles and products. So it is a higher price tag for a lot of our materials, but again, I think being in Taiwan, it's to our advantage. We're able to use higher quality or more expensive materials or labor, but we can still transfer it to this value to our customers. And so one way for us to communicate this is to be transparent about our pricing model and to let our customers know that, yeah, because we're at the source of all this really great textile options, it's kind of like a farm-to-table concept. So we're able to use higher quality materials, but at the same time, mark it up sort of less and then still maintain a good margin for us and a really good price point for our customer. And secondly, it's kind of hard because some customers, they understand the value of choosing more sustainable options, but some aren't quite there yet, or maybe they haven't found that motivation to choose more sustainable options. So one of the things that we did, because we're sold online, so we used to have this really nice box that we send our products in, and then which some of our customers loved. And then some other customers were like, okay, I think it's kind of wasteful. Next time, could you not send me this box? And I was like, that's a really good point. And so we moved some of our packaging into using biodegradable bags. And I know Nate is gonna hound me for this, but these biodegradable bags. And then some customers, which loved it, and then other customers wrote us an email and was like, you're using worse packaging. It's like cheaper.
Did you listen to Waste Not, Why Not's episode?
Yeah. You're using cheaper packaging options. This is not what I pay for. You guys used to have really nice packaging. And so I think it's part of our job to kind of educate our consumers, to communicate the value of what we're doing, and for them to buy into this whole sustainability concept.
Sure, we're going to get back to consumer awareness because I think that's really important. But Godfrey, any challenges you want to harp on?
I guess our business is slightly different. So their business is more targeted at consumer. Our business is targeted at businesses. And to our surprise, we actually don't have a demand problem. We actually have a supply problem. So our biggest challenge is how do we supply to our customers? Usability of electric vehicle is changing. It's more like a pull model because of government regulations changes. I mean, there are a lot of announcements of different governments. China is saying that there's going to be no more internal combustion engines by 2030. European is moving way ahead of the curve. So a lot of the construction vehicles, mining vehicles, due to usability aspects, they want electric purely because for safety. So imagine if you are operating in a mine 500 meters down under the ground, you don't want those fumes, right? And also the noise. Imagine you have an engine running and you have a massive earmuff and there's an accident, you can't actually tell the guy that's operating. So from a usability aspect, there's a huge demand for it. So I think our problem now is actually how do we serve these customers? And we're getting a lot of inquiries from customers all over the world. But right now we're a team of 60 people. How can we quickly do the prototyping? So normally there's a time span from converting from an ICE, internal combustion engine, into electric vehicles because these companies have been making traditional combustion vehicles for 50, 60 years, some of them 100 years. How do you turn it around? Through the prototyping, even if we provide them a prototype, it normally takes 9 to 18 months for internal validation before they turn into mass production. So we're getting over 150 customers asking us for prototypes now. How can we quickly deliver that? And while we have the market leadership today, especially in terms of immersion cooling, we always believe that while you're a leader, if you don't continue to maintain your leadership, you get catch up very quickly. So our biggest challenge right now is how do we attract the right talent, the right engineer, the right management, the right R&D staff to really expand the company. So slightly different, but equally a very important challenge.
Yeah, so for you, consumer awareness is not really as big an issue, but in sort of the environmental policy research, every year people are saying, oh, everyone's getting more and more interested in the environment. I feel like, the Amazon was burning recently, and everyone on my Facebook was saying, how come this isn't front page news? But at least for my Facebook, there was, hundreds and hundreds of people all saying this. So there is clearly this building environmental ethic that's kind of reestablishing. The first wave was sort of in the 1970s, at least in the US. Now we're having sort of a second populist wave. Is that affecting your businesses? I mean, for Godfrey, maybe not. There's clear performance benefits to electric vehicles and construction industry, but Melody or Ham, do you see a demand from consumers?
I think yes, and it's interesting because I just went to a circular textile initiative, a Taiwan circular initiative forum this past week, and a lot of them were industry suppliers and factories and textile side. And they were talking a lot about how these big brands, Adidas, Nike, they're doing a lot more sustainability initiatives, using more sustainable textiles. And then there was a couple of us who were smaller brands or startup brands. And we have the same sort of sentiment, and we feel the consumer buying more quality things and trying to be more conscious about how they spend their money. And I think having these consumers communicate with their brand about what they want, it really pushes us as a brand to source better materials, better quality, and it really helps make this whole circular fashion, sustainable fashion more of a hot topic.
Hammond, do you want to talk more about how you're trying to make your product green? And I'm not going to tear you down again. Because you talked to me before about trying to use recycled materials inside of your trash cans. Who are you talking with when you're making these decisions? Is this the potential buyers?
So what do you mean? Can you rephrase that?
Just why are you doing that?
So, why are you doing that? Is that or dat?
It's dat.
Oh, it's dat. Okay, I got it. So we're doing that because it's important to us. I mean, that actually translates into more costs internally in our company. And obviously we have the choice, can we kind of make our prices a little bit higher? But then that's you're risking fail or live or die. So I think doing that is very important to our business. And I think touching on consumer awareness, business awareness, because even businesses can be aware, corporates can be aware. You have to be careful because corporates, they have these KPIs of sustainability. So you have to make sure that you can do everything you can in your power to make sure that you're being used for the right reason, not for a KPI. And I guess that has to do with being prepared, like I mentioned before, and making sure that what you're doing is actually sustainable, which is pretty much what your whole podcast is about.
Thanks for lining that up for me.
Yeah.
So speaking about KPIs, Godfrey, you do a lot of stuff with money. I mean, how does that work? Do you want to talk about like ESGs and from a financial point of view, how important is that? Just money and green stuff.
Yeah. So I do wear a slightly different hat. So I also run a private equity fund in Hong Kong. I personally really like the whole concept of eco and sustainability, and it's very much like a buzzword in my mind. And I also think the timing is perfect, because if you have this idea 5-10 years ago, people would not understand it. Ham mentioned KPI. All the big major companies have now just got the thing called corporate responsibility that they need to take. Like Sony is one, that they have this green initiative. So if you have an idea, now is the right timing. But there's always a but. So sustainability and eco, while they're a buzzword, they're slightly different from all the buzzword that I've came across in my 20 years experience in the investment community. So if you start in the late 90s, everybody talks about .com. When you have a startup that adds .com to it, immediately your valuation jumps up 2 times. Then you come across the next phase, which is maybe 5 years ago, everybody talks about VR. So if you have a concept that adds VR to it, your valuation goes up and you get funded. Then you go into big data. People don't really understand big data at the time, but you mentioned big data, boom, it goes. Then they realize big data converts to AI, and then VR died off. Nobody hears about VR anymore. Who hears about VR recently? Nobody hears about VR anymore because they've converted into AR, because they realize AR is slightly more friendly. Then it leads to what Melody just mentioned, right? Eco and sustainability. Why a lot of people likes it, there's a fundamental problem. It's more expensive. It's always more expensive. So how can you, as a business, explain to people that, yeah, what I'm trying to do is more expensive, but it's gonna work? So it's slightly different in that sense. All the buzzword that I mentioned, except eco and sustainability, if you add that, it immediately becomes a sell. But sustainability and eco, from an investor standpoint, you still don't escape from the fundamental of a business, of the business model, right? If you come to an investor, for example, if you come to me with a pitch, I'll still ask you the same thing. What is your product? What is your addressable market? What is the ease of entry into your market? I mean, a lot of times, yeah, I want to change the world, but then comes back the question, so what? Everybody wants to change the world. How can you quickly get to cash flow break even? I mean, these are a lot of the questions that people, especially with green initiative, neglect. I mean, I'll mention a company that a lot of you guys may have heard. MiniWiz has done really, really well from a sustainability standpoint, but it took them a long time to really figure out what their business model is, right? And then they've done really well. And the moment they figured it out, it really, boom, took off, right? So they've just got a big investment from W.I. Harper and Temasek. Singapore government took them in. So I think before we have an idea, you still need to think about what the fundamental of your business is. How can you make money? Because otherwise, the business itself is not sustainable. So I guess that's kind of my view. The buzzword is good, but it doesn't change the fundamental.
I would agree. I mean, even for this podcast, if it was just Nate in a room drinking a beer, talking about the environment, some people would probably listen, but probably not a room full of people, and hopefully not more in the future. There's a lot of technical work that goes into a business or a podcast or anything else, and you can go to school for the environment. You can, read Grist and read the Green New York Times, and you can learn a lot about the environment. But if you don't know how to do marketing, if you don't know how to build a product, if you don't know how to take it to market, then it's not going to work. And so
It's not sustainable.
it's not going to sustain us ably either. Okay, so every episode I end the show by saying, this is recorded in a weird place in Taipei, Taiwan. And so people ask like, oh, is this like a Taiwanese environmental show? And no, because I'm not Taiwanese, but also because we just want to talk about things in the context of where they are. There's like Friends is set in New York. Other shows are set in other cities. So I wanted to talk about Taiwan. I don't watch a lot of normal human content. Why are you guys in Taiwan? Don't ask me why, but for you three, why start your business in Taiwan? You could have been in New York, you could have been anywhere else.
Taiwan has really the backbones of Taiwan is the textile industry. So it really made sense for us to set up shop here. A lot of our factories are within like 50 kilometers. It's just we try to keep everything in Taiwan, and that also helps us become more sustainable because nothing needs to be flown in an airplane, and we can keep our eyes on production, so it helps with the quality checks, and there's less waste. Everything gets done more efficiently and faster. So that's definitely why we decided to do it in Taiwan. And then the whole recycling thing, we have one of the best recycling rates in the world. So like plastic bottles, we experimented with recycled polyester. We made leggings, and each pair of leggings was made from like 16 recycled plastic bottles, and our sports bras are made from 5 or 6 plastic bottles. And we're talking to a company now that sources their recycled nylon from fishing nets that's collected from the oceans, because as we all know, Taiwan is an island, so protect our oceans.
Okay, so I came to Taiwan around 5 years ago, and I'm pretty sure you guys have like similar stories. You get here, tourist vibes, you're going around on the street, you grab a drink, you can't find a trash can. Who's with me? Yes. Everyone goes through this problem. So I decided to do something about it, and I was like, why don't I make an app that maps all 1,800 trash bins in Taipei? So I did it. At first it was called Bins App, and then we quickly were like, well, why stop at bins? Why not do parking and water fountains and toilets and blah, blah, blah. So we had this like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for Taipei. So basically, we built this map and we're like, okay, it's a map. None of this stuff is really on Google. What now? Why? And so we decided, what if someone walks by a trash bin and sees that it's overflowing? Ding! They could press report and it would connect that message directly to the government. What if someone went to a public restroom and it was a shitty experience? I don't know, can I swear?
Yes.
They could put thumbs up or thumbs down. So quickly, kind of what happened was I was bridging this gap between citizens and city. That's kind of the first project. It's called MapGia. I don't know if anyone ever downloaded it, but we had it was only like 10,000 users in Taipei. We thought we were going to generate this like massive amount of smart data, and this thing was going to explode. This is all typical startup stuff when you first start out. And no one gave a shit. No one used the extra features. People did, but it was like 0.1% of people. And I'm pretty sure it was us. Okay, so this thing failed. And I think the reason it failed was, first of all, because we were like, oh, we're a social project, And if you're a social project, that's fantastic. But get on grants and do your admin, because if you don't, you're not going to make money. We didn't. We thought, it was going to last, so it failed. I took about 6 months off. If people have heard the quote before, you try to boil the ocean. We were trying to boil the ocean. We were trying to do way too much. We were trying to address way too many problems in the city. So we focused, and we're like, where's the root? Where's the excitement? And it was in waste. So then we're like, let's build a piece of hardware, very simple, about 5 centimeters, stick it in, and then that's where we are today.
Always seeking the root, and it's always waste. Correct. Okay, so that was some nice things about Taiwan. Are there any challenges? Is there anything that's extra difficult doing your business in Taiwan? Are there any other environmental challenges?
I touched on it before you asked the question. I think why we're in Taiwan, because it is the shortest distance from concept to reality. I don't know how many of you guys know a large amount of Tesla parts are actually made in Taiwan. So Tesla is not actually made in the US, a lot of it made in Taiwan. Soon to be possibly, SpaceX would have a lot of things to be made in Taiwan. So Taiwan is actually very, very strong from, I mentioned the OEM history. So from a hardware perspective, you are the best place. From a talent perspective, I think we're also in the best place. A challenge that is very real for all of us sitting here in this room is we're talking about startup, the most important thing besides concept for a startup is a strong enough capital marketplace to support our idea. And on that note, I think Taiwan is quite weak. From an investor, a local investor standpoint, access is not easy. I mean, how many VC fund you can really talk about or mention that are based in Taiwan that you actually know? Can someone name? I mean, there's AppWorks that everybody hears about because Justin's become TCC, Jingli, but there's really not that many. And when you are able to get through the door to put through a pitch, this is not from my own experience, this is from what I've seen, is the understanding of valuation. They don't know how to value a company. I got one that I came back from a friend, they're still asking per share price. What is your per share price? And I was like, what has per share price got to do with anything? Like, you should ask about what the enterprise value of the company is, because how big is a slice of cake is how many pieces you cut it, right? So if a company that's is worth $100, I cut it 100 pieces, per share price is 1. If I cut it 10 pieces, per share price is 10. So that concept in investor community in Taiwan, I find there's still a lot of lack of knowledge from that space. But yeah, so I mean, to address specifically what the challenges are, I think the venture capital, the growth capital market from an investment standpoint is not there. And I think there could be room for improvement from the government aspect to actually promote startups. I mean, there's a lot of talks about, oh yeah, Taiwan government supports startup, but what have they actually really done to promote startup? I don't think they've done a lot. So that's just what I've seen.
Thanks. Melody, you were shaking your head a lot.
Yeah, because I feel you. But we're kind of on the other side. So we talked to some investors, but Taiwan doesn't have that many brands. We're very product first, and then brand kind of as an afterthought. Unlike, in the States with a very mature capital industry where a lot of times like the brand kind of comes first, and then the product might be mediocre, but then the branding is done really well, and so investors see the value in that. But a lot of the investors that we talk to, I don't think they really know how to price a brand or how to value a brand or the potential of how much the branding can carry the brand and like the product. So that's definitely a challenge that we ran into, but we're hanging in there. Yeah.
Okay. And you're hanging in there. We have these challenges. We have this context for Taiwan. What does the future hold? People seem to think I'm optimistic about the future, but how do you guys feel in your business, the environment, future technology, what you're planning next? The future's too complicated because we're all going to be underwater.
Sure. We're excited for ViaSweat's future. We are working towards closing the loop. So we're implementing a buyback program where you can recycle your old sports bras. You can send them back to us. We'll give you like a cash back. And then we'll donate it, or we'll find ways to get rid of the bra in a more sustainable way. So we're excited about that.
Awesome. Waste Not, Why Not loves buyback programs.
We're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we'll hear some questions from our live audience, which drew out some very interesting discussions. And meanwhile, please consider donating to us. We take monthly donations through Patreon at patreon.com/wastenotwhynot. We're incredibly thankful to supporters who have pledged $5 a month or even $1 a month to help us with making the show. And we'll also post bonus materials as a thank you to our Patreon supporters.
Okay, so we're going to enter the question and answer time.
Hello, my name is Jen. I'm the coordinator for Extinction Rebellion Taiwan. And I was wondering, for the future, do you guys have any plans pertaining to your production, such as clean energy using wind or solar power, or if you're already doing that?
Hi, Jen. Thank you for your question. We do try to encourage our suppliers to be more environmental, but again, for them, they have to have a really big incentive. I mean, of course, saving the environment is very important, but for them, it's a really big cost concern. So a lot of our suppliers, they do adhere to environmental standards like Higgs or Blue Sign certified. So they do get rid of, like wastewater management. Those are all up to a certain environmental standard. But I know some factories that we work with are trying to, they create their own energy or they recycle the energy back into their factories. So there is some movement to it, and I think that also has to do with that whole corporate responsibility aspect that a lot of these companies have to have responsibility over.
And also, RE100 is in Taiwan, and there are 3 Taiwanese companies that have committed to use only renewable electricity by 2030, I believe.
Okay, so this is a question for Melody. So I've got a startup company as well in Taiwan, and we manufacture textiles as well using recycled PET and recycled rubber. In terms of marketing, though, I've never come across any kind of certification for the use of recycled materials. And in fact, even trying to get the suppliers to say how much recycled material is in the material is now impossible. There seems to be no legislation that I've come across in this area. Is there something I'm missing? Is this your kind of experience? Is there something coming in the future?
I agree. From our standpoint, what we want to try to do is to be able to communicate the story of our textiles to our consumers, because that's how they kind of digest this sort of information. And it's important for us to figure out the origins and the source of the textile, the fibers, and even up to the fishing nets or the plastic bottles, and to go kind of up the supply chain as high up as we can go. But you're right, it's really hard to kind of track it and like a textile sort of resume and history. But last week when I was at the Taiwan Circular Textile Initiative Forum, they said that they're coming out with like a RFID chip that can be made into like this tiny little fiber, and that you can embed it into the textiles. And it's still in their R&D period right now, and then you can kind of like scan it and then figure out the whole supply chain process and where it kind of came from. I think it's important to figure out the origin and the source. So absolutely, I agree. I think there's a lot of discrepancy. I think it's hard to source, but I think there are efforts to make it better.
Any other questions? Yes, definitely.
Hi, this is for all of you with startups in general. So I think you already mentioned towards the consumer, it's about education. It's about consumers wanting to pay more for something that's sustainable. As a business, you also need to grow. How do you balance spending money on growing and having more impact because there's more people using your product versus also taking the trade-off yourself, right? So going for a sustainable supplier, et cetera, and then basically spending some of your hard-earned profits on slowing down your own growth. How do you balance that?
I guess I'll take it. So that's a fantastic question. And like you said, it's a balancing act. So this all wraps perfectly into everything we've kind of talked about today. And the awareness of people today, just like the gentleman before you asked the question of like, labels and showing, this is a sustainable product and stuff like that. That actually makes a large difference in the future of market capitalization for products. And I'm a firm believer in that. So I think consumers will start to make choices, better choices, and will pay more for sustainably sourced products and solutions. Now for businesses, they also will do this. And I think part of our business and the way our entire business is structured, we are kind of betting that they will. And if they don't, well, we don't want to live in that world, where all these mega companies are not doing their part in running sustainably or using sustainable products or selling sustainable products and solutions. So a lot of it is a balancing act with a little bit of a bet that companies are going to have this mindset change. And I think Adidas is a perfect example and how they were able to capitalize a lot in the market share of shoes with their ocean plastic line that they had. And that as a case study alone is a perfect example of where I see the future going.
Those shoes are made in Taiwan.
Fantastic Taiwan.
But it's only 200 per made.
Because you have to start somewhere, and you have to develop the supply chain. In talking with Far Eastern, it took them several years to figure out this reverse supply chain of how you collect ocean plastic, bring it back to a factory, chop it, process it, and reconvert it into recycled plastic. It takes time. People always like to say, oh, it's 2019, how could we still be doing this? Well, I mean, like 60 years ago, well, number one, I wouldn't be in Taiwan, and we would not be able to freely organize like this. But it takes time to build these things. So it starts with 200 shoes, and then it's 2,000.
Well, there's actually more than that. I think Nike, for example, worked very closely with Miniwiz. So I don't know whether you guys know Flyknit. A lot of the Flyknit material are recycled plastic made by a Taiwanese company. I don't know whether you guys are familiar with Nike Lab. Does anyone know Nike Lab? So Nike Lab is a green initiative. So all the Nike Lab decoration fit out are all from recycled materials, a lot of them from recycled sneakers. So it's moving that direction. But to specifically address to that gentleman's question, I think, how will we get there? My personal view is a combination of government initiative, government subsidies, corporate responsibility that we talked about a little bit, a lot of hits and misses, and then eventually turns into a habit. So I don't know whether you guys read about McDonald's getting rid of plastic straw, replace it with paper, and then it realized that it's actually more polluting than plastic. So I think there is a phase that will take some time, that it will become our day-to-day life, and the next thing we will forget that it's actually more expensive because that has become part of our day-to-day life. But I think to kickstart the process, it has to be an organization that is powerful enough to be impactful, and that being said, most powerful is likely to be government, and then them pushing either through subsidy or regulations, and then the company pushes down to the consumer. So is it likely to be a top-down approach from my perspective?
More questions. That was a good one.
Hi, I heard earlier somebody said something about shoes being made with plastic from the ocean. And I was wondering if calculations have been run to see if it's produced more CO2 by going out there to fetch it than just getting it here. And if so, do you think still good to get more people involved because it's brandy in a sense? Thank you.
Are you talking about the ocean cleanup?
Or any such thing that, not the ocean cleanup, yeah, basically, yeah.
I've wanted to make an episode about, that's actually the reason I wanted to make a podcast, was because once plastic pollution enters the ocean, it's basically already gone. And DNVGL, the shipping company, and they do a lot of different things, they actually did the calculations. I forget the number, but they did the calculations. They found you would put significantly more CO2 in the atmosphere cleaning up ocean trash. It's much better to do source reduction. So companies like Dow and DuPont, who do beach cleanups, I don't think we can take that seriously. And the same thing with the ocean cleanup. Source reduction is the most important. Obviously, if you want to do a beach cleanup, I'm not going to tell you not to do that, but people who say, like 4 Oceans, that little ocean bracelet, or the ocean cleanup, who say that we're going to stop ocean plastic pollution. No, that's not how you do that. You stop it at source. You have a carbon tax. You have effective waste management in low-income countries that have waste leakage issues, and you redesign plastic out by creating take-back programs or just reducing it entirely. I don't know the calculations, but that's just my rant.
What if it's like
But do you still do you think it's worth it for the branding aspect of it, not for the company itself, but for the movement of environmental sustainability?
I don't think so, but I have extreme views. I think that distracts from the problem and creates a false narrative of change.
Thank you.
What if it's like a solar-powered one, and it just goes through the ocean?
It's funny.
At zero emissions.
It's like a conversation we had at the coffee shop. What is the cleanest, cheapest form of energy? Because that will solve all the problem. And me and him have a slightly different view on what is the best source of energy.
But then you'd have to deep dive in, like, what makes a solar panel,
Exactly.
How
So
much
solar
energy does it
panel
need?
is
How
actually
big does it have to be?
hugely polluting when you actually make the solar panel.
I don't want to get academic, guys, but if you look up life cycle analysis of different types of energy, you will find that solar, wind has some of the lowest life cycle costs, as does nuclear. As does nuclear. Has also a very low life cycle emissions per megawatt hour.
How about hydroelectric with the waves?
Oh, tidal. Well, there's all like new experimental forms of energy and like what you talked about. I mean, someone could do that. Someone could solve fusion tomorrow and make a lot of what we're talking about kind of irrelevant, because we could have.
So my thing is it better to go from 0 to 100 or 0 to 10? And how does that affect 0 to 10 being our current solution for ocean plastic? 0 to 100 would be a tidal system, hydroelectric, massive ocean cleaner thingy that's like 100% sustainable. I think that's really the argument, because there's a ripple effect of having something that is at least attempting to solve this problem, arguably not as sustainable as it should be, and then you can deep dive on the data and see, is this actually collecting enough waste, so on and so forth.
Sure. I mean, yeah, you're right. I think that's a really good philosophical discussion, and I would say, why not both? I mean, do both. But I could tell you that neither would actually solve the problem. So I reject that entirely. Okay,
14 trees.
The
14 trees.
It'd be a good T-shirt. If the problem
I'm
is,
going to get you a T-shirt that says 14 trees. I don't care about that.
Is it a recycled T-shirt?
It's going to be, I'm going to order it from her.
Just because you said my trigger word, which is, ocean
Dat.
cleanup and plastic and dat, I I mean, we know how to do it. Look at Taiwan. Taiwan 20 years ago had a 70% waste collection rate. Now Taiwan has the 5th highest recycling rate, maybe even number 1, depending on how you count it. Taiwan sends less than 1% of its trash to landfill. Taiwan did this at a time where it was poorer than South Korea and Japan. So Taiwan chose to do this to make these policies and to solve waste. Southeast Asian countries could do this as well. Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, they're different for sure than Taiwan. But if they adopt those principles, they can do it. And none of those principles are build the largest freestanding structure in the ocean, collect micro bits of plastic, put it in a boat, take it back to land and burn it, and then turn it, maybe turn it into a shoe, but it'll only be like 10 shoes. So
Give it up for NatureNate, everyone. Give it up. Yeah.
woo!
We should switch seats.
It's not about me today, it's about you guys. Any more questions? I feel like yes, very forceful hand in the back, shooting straight up.
Thank you. My name is Ben, and it's only everything that you are all doing. It's extremely noble and honorable, and I have tremendous respect for it. But given the scale of the climate emergency, just like how are you trying to plan for that, and how are you trying to educate other people about that?
I mean, how do we address the looming environmental crisis? My response was to make a podcast, but that was partially because I tried to do other stuff, and everyone seemed to act like we didn't know what to do. We didn't know what the best solution was, and we do know. Majority of emissions come from fossil fuels. Let's not use as many fossil fuels. That's the lowest hanging fruit. Coal is becoming increasingly cost prohibitive in many areas. So focus for that. Demand a carbon tax. Demand, if you're in the US, demand extended producer responsibility like the EU and like Taiwan and Japan and Korea have all done. We have answers, but for some reason I think people get faced with this massive anxiety about what to do, and they're kind of like, oh, we just got to do something. But there are specific answers if we talk to scientists and researchers.
I think I can add on to what you said. We actually, surprisingly, a little Taiwanese company get approached by a large amount of international, huge oil and gas company. So they realize their problem is real. They realize that internal combustion engines' future is coming to an end. And to our surprise, most of the oil and gas company don't make most of their money from fuel. They make money from the supplementary products like engine oil and all the other things related to the car. And guess what? Electric vehicle don't need engine oil, right? So what next for them? So Repsol, a Spanish oil company, have already announced they will no longer invest in oil and gas products or oil and gas fuel. So they realize that problem. So where it goes next, again, I go back, I've mentioned, I think probably the 5th times now, it's gonna be regulation driven. When the government said it's gonna be no more combustion engine from X date on, or the biggest pollution is actually commercial vehicles. I mean, people always think about our cars. Oh yeah, I'm gonna do environment great. I'm gonna buy a Tesla. I'm gonna drive an electric car. But guess what? You drive from home to work. You park your car in the office for 10 hours, and then you drive home. It's the real pollutions are the commercial vehicles that are constantly on the road. So those changes drives again by companies' profit, government regulations. So I mean, we can help to lobby, I think, but eventually the real changes come from the decision makers, unfortunately. But at least it's good that you see signs of all these oil major starting to worry. I was in the Middle East speaking to one of the oil nation, and it was very interesting that they came and approached us, and this is not Xing, but just approached us as a investment firm, that they, for the first time, they realized that the nation has been spending without thinking because they think that the oil would continue to come from the ground. They never saved anything. They would just spend and spend. They never had an investment program for the sovereign fund. For the first time, their sovereign fund needs to start thinking about how to invest wisely. And they want to invest in renewable energy. They want to invest in new technology. So this problem is real. And we all know that when they wake up and they're starting to ask these kind of questions, they know the end is coming.
Question in the back.
Hi, my name is Patrick. So far we've heard a lot about businesses that are small or medium size, but I happen to work for a company which is enormous. And all of our sustainability initiatives are lip service. They have no meaning in our day-to-day operations. So can you help to give some advice at how you can spread a culture of sustainability throughout a larger organization?
I guess I'll take this because I do consulting with large corporates, trying to convince them to take up renewable energy initiatives, renewable electricity initiatives, RE100. And we've talked to a number of companies. Some in Taiwan just immediately do it without even really fully thinking about the consequences. I'm not going to say who, but that's a very aggressive attitude that has drawbacks and strengths. Other companies think about it a very long time, and they build a team over time. And other companies are kind of in some stage in between. And what I see for all the successful companies, and this is true of companies that started RE100 like IKEA, or companies that just aren't even that environmental, but you hear about them all the time anyway, like Bank of America. They always have a dedicated sustainability team. So you just have to do the hard work, unfortunately, of building that culture, of educating them, of holding, environmental movie nights, of maybe having like meat-free Monday and slowly building that ethos. And that's something that I wanted to talk about in this podcast too, is that a lot of people talk about, I don't want to use straws. I want to live a plastic-free lifestyle. That's important, obviously. But what's far more important is what you do in your work life, is building that culture amongst your employees. It sounds like a very neoliberal thing to say, but it's true. You can make a disproportionate amount of influence if you convince your company to stop printing paper all the time, or if you convince them to go to one less trade show, or to maybe do digital marketing instead. So there is really no easy answer. There are people that I know in this room that have tried to lead sustainability initiatives in their own companies, and it's very difficult. But
I have something to add. We touched on it a little bit. Corporate responsibility is a buzzword. A lot of companies just want to do something so they can put that tick. So on their website, corporate green initiative. But in order for it to be meaningful, unfortunately, it comes back to original business model. Is it cost effective? Does it impact my bottom line? Does it make sense? By doing this, will it increase my top line? Because at the end of the day, if it's a big company, it's listed, shareholders value, and so on and so on. So it has to be convinced at the board level, management level, that they really want to do something. And it's not something you can just do overnight. It's not like I want to be green and tomorrow I will be green. It's not, right? So by deploying smart trash can in all your offices, does it take the green? Maybe, but it doesn't really be impactful. So it has to be a proper plan and strategy. Maybe you can help, right? But I think it has to be a top-down approach. And it has to be properly thoughtful and thought through. So I think at this stage, while the environment, the economy, the end user, consumer are changing, we're not at that point yet, but it will. It will be a demand that where consumers would say, I want these companies that I shop at are green.
Hi, my name is Christina. I would like to ask two questions. My first question is what is your biggest pain point or most time-consuming task in your daily operations? And my second question is what forms of collaborations can you have with other sustainable business in your ecosystem, domestically or internationally? Thank you.
I guess I'll answer this question as the CFO hat of Xing. So I'm the money guy, right? So I control money. And like every other company, we have limited amount of resources, capital. So the technology guy would always want to do everything, and the finance guy would always fight and say, which one gives me the best return of capital? So I think it's debating with the management team. I mentioned a little bit about the amount of customers that we have inquiring to get our products. And also at the same time is picking the winners. I think that's the thing that is actually really difficult for a startup, product-driven startup. So I'm quoting another Taiwanese company called Fukuda, who now produces motor for Tesla motor cars. And the only reason that Fukuda ended up being the supplier for Tesla is at the time when Tesla was really small, they went around to all the other big suppliers. No one wanted to serve them because they don't think Tesla are going to survive in the next 5 years. But guess what? Tesla has now become the largest electrical vehicle maker in the world. So picking the right customer base to grow with them is also equally important. So I think a lot of the time people say, yeah, go find the biggest customer and they will be a stable supplier for you, and stable customers, you grow along with them, may not necessarily always be the best choice. Sometimes it's picking the winners that are also equally a startup, but you see there's a future, and you work with them when they are small, and they will stay with you when they become big. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face is how do we allocate our limited resources.
Daniel, final question.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Daniel. I work at Gogoro, so if you listen to the podcast, you may know me from the episode about batteries. My question was response to what Godfrey mentioned earlier about sovereign wealth fund investing or wanting to invest in renewable. And we also talked about, well, also for a small green company or a company with a green product or green service, finding capital. Do you see any premium on green investments? You know, we can buy green bonds already, but like for a startup or venture capital, is there any premium there? Does it cost more? And for the future, do you expect that to grow or change?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I think I mentioned a little bit during my previous answers. It's a brand new asset class from an investment perspective. There has been a lot of green investment fund before. Most of them died. The best performing one I happen to be working very closely with is started by a gentleman called Al Gore, who started their movie that kickstarted this whole initiative and won an Oscar. Generation Investment Management. So I work very closely with them, which also invested in your very fantastic company. If I recall correctly, their track record IRR, I think, is 26%, which is unheard of for a green fund. Having said that, they've just closed a new fund helped raised by UBS. So increasingly there will be more and more investment-specific targeted fund that will drive into these kind of areas, especially in one of the biggest polluting places in China. To answer your second question, whether there is a premium is very difficult to measure. How much am I willing to pay more compared to the next company? Because it's almost impossible to have two identical companies doing exactly the same thing. One does recycle, the other one doesn't, because their market space is slightly different, the target customer is slightly different, and so on and so on. I don't think the premium is there yet, but there are certainly more and more company and investment fund investing into this area. One for the corporate responsibility that we are talking about, because it's a lot cheaper for a big corporate to buy a company that's already driving these kind of things, and all of a sudden they tick the box, than for them to actually build the initiative. To answer that gentleman that mentioned before, if I'm a computer company, it's easier for me to buy a smaller computer company that already has that initiative, and all of a sudden I've got that tick, because people don't have that measure. To specifically address another gentleman's question on recycled material, whether there's a standard, I don't think there is yet. But yeah, so I think it will develop. But and it's only going one direction, because we all know that I think sustainability is here to stay.
Okay, great. Let's wrap up. This was our first live show. This was an experiment, and I'm very grateful for our panelists to come and do this with me. And all of you are tremendously supportive. There's no real conclusion to this talk, though. There's not going to be like a really hard answer. We like to end some episodes saying, do X, do Y, do Z, do something as an individual, do something as an office, do something at a policy or state level. But this is a conversation that we're starting, and we're going to keep having, and there's not necessarily going to be something you can always do. Is it better to go from 1 to 10 or from 1 to 100? Is it better to balance, how do you balance investment? So we also have a variety of companies here to kind of give you different viewpoints. We have B2B, B2B, B2C. We have micro companies. We have small companies. We have unknown-sized companies. And so that's what we wanted to do. So this is the first step. So if you liked it, there'll probably be more. If you really like it, just going to plug Patreon one more time. You can become a patron. And with that, I'm Nature Nate, and this has been Waste Not, Why Not Live, recorded in the Red Room with a bunch of people. Wow, give me the chills. Do you have a question for us? Email them to ask@wastenotwhynot.com. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a good rating. Support us on Patreon. We are Waste Not Why Not on Patreon and Facebook, and Waste Not Pod on Twitter. This has been a Ghost Island Media production in collaboration with All Hands. This episode is produced by Emily Y. Wu and myself, Nature Nate. Original theme song by Chris Lowe. I can finally look at you in the eyes when I say that. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.